Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Charity CEO Summit. We're really grateful for you being part of this with us today. We're really looking forward to our time together. We've got some great speakers lined up, and it's just great to have you. And as Craig Gershell said, everyone wins when the leader gets better. So we just want this to be an opportunity for leaders to get better and to learn some things from each other and spend some time together. So welcome and grateful to have you. I'm going to pass you over to my co-host, Jim.
Yeah, Jim Foster here from Cause Leadership. Really excited to hear these leaders as Dave introduced them here today, talking about leadership mindsets and how important that is to help us shape strong team cultures. We have actually interviews with 7 charity leaders today. So we have a lot to get through, about maybe 10 minutes with each. The recordings were done just this last week. And so they're very fresh interviews. And so an opportunity to hear each one of them just express in response to Dave's interviews what has been helpful in their own leadership as charity executives over the past years when challenges came and difficulties, or just to get through the workload upon them. This first set will be touching on the topic or the overall topic of mindset in overcoming key challenges. Dave Hutchinson, our CEO, will be interviewing them. And so without much ado, we'll move over to those interviews.
Good afternoon, Stacey, and welcome to the Charity CEO Summit. Thank you very much for being a part of this.
Yeah, great to be here with you, Dave.
Stacey Palmer is the CEO of Prison Fellowship Canada and a longtime friend and colleague as well, and just looking forward to connecting with you today, Stacey, and for your insights and around leadership and some of the challenges that are part of what it is to be in leadership today. So as you know, most CEOs today, especially CEOs in the charitable sector, they deal with change. Change seems to be the constant and the uncertainty that comes with that. And so we need to adapt and be resilient to those realities. But just from your own perspective, as you've navigated change and conflict through your leadership and I would say that, the complexity that you operate within as far as external realities. Have you got an instance that you could share with us where you sort of had an unexpected external challenge? And how did you adapt and facilitate and align the organization against its core mission still?
So we've had a couple in the last 5 years that really stand out. Of course, the global health crisis that we all went through stands out for everyone. It was particularly challenging for us because we were shut out of the prisons, and so, you're kind of faced with, do we even have a ministry?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Where do you go from now? And then the volunteers. So you've spent all this time training and building up a volunteer group, and now they don't have a place to go and volunteer to. And so for sure that was very, very challenging for us. And so the way that we handled that was to create a phone line where we could access prisoners by phone in the institutions, and then use the same volunteers. So they kept going, they kept doing their training, they kept their weekly spot that they were used to having, and that enabled us to maintain basically our workforce. Even though it's a volunteer driven organization, it was still a workforce, and that allowed us to maintain that. So that was good. We went into launching video conferencing, video training. So all of those things changed, but the lasting benefits were that now we had this additional access where we are accessing an additional 6,000 prisoners a year. The health crisis is gone, but the benefits are very much there. And then also being able to reach remote volunteers through video conferencing and that type of thing.
Yeah, so the innovation you had to come up with during the pandemic has stuck and been useful afterwards too. Thanks for that, Stacey. When you look at so obviously working in a lot of complexity, change and uncertainty. Those are all sort of the standard things these days, it seems. Um, how do you manage team conflict when that pops up? I'm sure we all wish we had perfect organizations where everybody was responding perfectly the way we would hope that they would. But we're all human, and we make judgment errors and all that sort of stuff. Just curious, from your perspective as a leader, how do you manage and deal with team conflict?
For sure, conflict is inevitable, and we try
Mhm.
to normalize it. We are very lucky to have an organization that has long-term staff that have been together, that want to be together, and
Mhm.
because we work in our programs with people, because we're always working in a growth mindset and in an emotional healthy mindset, and trying to bring those things to others, they naturally creep into our organization. I could actually give you an example from yesterday. We had an
Okay.
individual that had to confront over some things that were going on, and the individual wrote me a really quick email and said, I know I got a strong personality, and I just used that word to kind of start and disarm the whole conversation. And the tension of, well, tell me what you think a strong personality is.
Mhm.
And we got there and we just got into this big conversation, and then you're reducing that tension and that anticipation of being hit, and opening up a mindset of curiosity and
Mhm.
non-judgment, and
Yeah.
let's just take a look at this without any judgment. What's
Yeah.
it about? And so,
Um,
and then just fostering generosity and graciousness in that.
yeah.
Mhm.
That's great. Thank you. The other thing, we're balancing the innovation work that you guys did during the pandemic, which has resulted in value. That innovation during transformation requires some attention. What strategies did you implement to navigate any sort of tension between the essential services of PFC, while at the same time driving organizational change? You had to embrace that. So,
So I love this question. My
mhm.
team really wishes that they could answer this
Okay.
question. So being a visionary leader, and certainly my staff from time to time will, no more vision, no more vision, because they know it means a lot of work for them. So
Right. Yeah.
one of the ways that we handled that was that we had a discussion which erupted out of some tension, just around there were these essential things, but then there was all these innovations. So how are we going to deal with it? So we actually developed something that we call Innovation Lab. So
Okay.
it's a spot on the we just put it up on the cloud, and it's a series of documents, and all the ideas get recorded into the Innovation Lab, and then whoever has margin in their work time or space, if they have an interest, they can go into the lab, claim a project, and say, I want to be the lead on this project, or I want to participate on this project, and move it forward
Hmm.
and start to record ideas. And then once that happens, it becomes part of our monthly staff meeting.
Okay.
And then we collectively determine what's a reasonable amount of time and resources that we can bring this innovation to bear. And we've brought some really cool ideas
Oh,
to
that's great.
the organization through that. But it takes the pressure off the
Mhm.
team, that just because I come up with a new idea, or someone comes up with a new idea, oh my goodness, now how do we revamp everything?
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
pulled that pressure off.
Oh, that's great. So when you look back at some of these experiences, Stacey, you're leading through change and uncertainty. What advice do you have for other charity leaders that might be facing similar circumstances?
I think the first thing I would say is build a really positive attitude
Mm. Mhm.
toward change. Make
Yeah.
it fun. Think of it as fun, like, ooh, this is exciting. What's gonna actually come out of that? And I understand that can sound a little unrealistic when we look at the current climate politically and different things that
Yeah.
go on. No one's sitting there going, ooh, this looks like fun. I would challenge up and coming leaders to actually do exactly that. Again, that word curiosity. I wonder what this will bring about, because we often fill in the blanks with negativity and think that this change is going to be awful. It's going to bring, none of us want to change, right? We're driven for comfort, but to look at it positively, and then to build a culture of adaptability and innovation. When you're leading meetings, we do something called elastic thinking, and it's not just what happens if we lose, but what happens if we win.
Yeah.
And which is something that we often don't take the time to contemplate, and just have a lot of dialogue around what if, and
Yeah.
and as soon as people start to see that, there's ideas and there's ways to approach this, they can manage that. The other piece of advice is I would prioritize mission over method. Don't
Mm.
stuck on your methods of how you do things. We have changed how we respond to the issue of crime at Prison Fellowship so many times in the last 10 years, and that can generate a lot of energy. And build resilience in your staff as well. And then, as leaders, if you're in the charitable space, building a diverse funding model is always, looking for ways to do that is always great. And probably my number one piece of advice is invest in people and
Yeah.
invest in relationships.
So I guess the innovation again that probably needs to come into play, and the two sides of that coin are opportunity and challenge. And it sounds like you've certainly had experience doing that, and it sounds like you're going to have to be doing some more in the future. So, but
And
Stacey,
for it, Dave.
and up for it, exactly. That's right. So, thank you for today. I just appreciate these insights. Thank you for sharing this with the group today, and we really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you, Dave. Great to be with you.
Good afternoon, Fred. It's great to have you here today. And just for our folks that are watching, this is Fred WITTEVEEN from Children Believe. He's the CEO. And Fred, give us just a bit of an overview of yourself and Children Believe, and then we'll jump into some questions together.
Thanks, David. Before I got into international development, I was a pastor in Jane and Finch for over 15 years. And then we made the transition, my family and I, to work overseas with two organizations in Kenya, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. And then in 2020, the opportunity opened up for me to come to Children Believe, which had just rebranded from Christian Children's Fund of Canada. And I was quite excited about the rebrand, and actually interviewed just before COVID was declared a global pandemic, was offered the role, and came back to Canada during hard lockdown.
Yes, indeed.
And so for those of you who may not know very much about Children Believe used to be Christian Children's Fund of Canada. It's a 60-year-old organization, part of the Child Fund Alliance, which is a global alliance at 11 different countries. Children Believe works in 7 countries in Asia, Africa, and Central South America. We focus on breaking barriers to transform the lives of children. So that they can live and dream fearlessly, with a special focus on education. And we're also have been a traditional child sponsorship organization, and are transitioning from that to other ways of raising funds to improve the lives of children in some of the world's most vulnerable places.
Yeah.
So that's a little bit about me.
Excellent. Thank you, Fred. That's a great lead into our topic of conversation today, which is change and uncertainty. We can call it adaptive resilience if we want to give it a sort of a title, but certainly leading through organizational change and sectoral change. I'm sure you're seeing that as well. When you think of a couple of examples, maybe one or two examples of since you've joined Children Believe where you've had to adapt and consider transformational change? The name change was significant. Sure, going through the pandemic was as well. But you're also talking about transitioning out of child sponsorship as well. So those are all pretty significant, even on their own. So maybe one or two examples of where you're facing change.
Just listening to you, these changes happened all alongside each other. Traditionally, Children Believe is a child sponsorship organization, over 80% of our funding at that time, and doing development work. And then all of a sudden, you're in a global pandemic requiring us to pivot into humanitarian programming, which we had not done before in any significant way. And then at the same time, child sponsorship, which has been a great way for us to connect with Canadians who want to support children, but that really has, as a product, appealed to an aging group of Canadians, and younger Canadians give differently, and so recognizing that we needed to diversify our revenue while still taking care of the donors we have. And at the same time, with the new name, reintroducing us to the Canadians. And we actually rebranded during COVID. It wasn't planned that way. It
Right.
just turned that way. And that was hard. That was very hard. And then the other aspect from an organizational perspective of the impact of COVID is that as a leader, I didn't see my staff essentially for the first 2 years.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had to lead virtually.
Yeah.
With a few occasions where I got to meet my staff. First couple of years, our board meetings are all virtual. And for me, that was hard because I was used to engaging with people in the office, engaging the field, and all of a sudden the things that I considered my strengths, I had to figure out how do I get to know the people I'm working with, the board that I serve in a virtual world. And then, the gradual transition to hybrid work.
Yeah.
Well, at the same time, but so the challenge of change, when you're thrust into change, is to recognize the opportunities they provide.
Yeah.
And actually, when you have multiple sets of changes, it actually increases the opportunities if you have the eyes and courage to do it. So
Yeah.
we were able to accelerate the shift from child sponsorship to a willingness to diversify funding, still ongoing, by the way. And I think the current moment we're in is even accelerating it even further
Yeah.
as we figure out how do we connect with Canadians in a new way.
Thank you, Fred. I mean, those are all pretty significant changes, as you say, especially coming one wave and then another wave coming after it. That's obviously had to have some impact on your culture as an organization. I'm just wondering how you've been able to adapt culture-wise within Children Believe for the team.
We do many more town halls than we've ever done.
Mm.
I just had a global leadership team meeting, and I had, rather than us do a lot of talking as senior leadership, I said, what are your questions about the CEO report that's going to the board?
Mm.
And I said, and then we're going to go into breakout groups. That's the lovely thing of technology. And I said, I have two questions. Well, three. One, celebrate one win. You got to celebrate a lot of wins when you're going through change.
Yeah.
Because people often feel like they're not measuring up. And I said, you know what? This is a long road. You need to celebrate every single win. I just said this yesterday.
Mm.
And then I said, celebrate one win. And everyone got a chance to do it because everybody likes to celebrate. And then I asked them go into two questions. Question one, what are the external challenges you're currently facing? We needed to hear from them because we not just for senior leadership, we needed staff to hear, directors to hear from each other that they're in the same boat. And I needed them to go into that. Plus, it helps me, and I'm going to share this with our board, what I heard. And then the second question was, despite the challenges, what are the opportunities you see? So you really got to keep the glass half full as opposed to half empty. You got to be able to stare challenge in the face, but at the same time, you need to really work at uh, what are the opportunities here. The other thing we've learned is, boy, you got to break down silos quickly in order to manage this. And we continuously work on that. The rate at which we're challenging our internal ways of working has accelerated. And that's critical because the old ways of working last a long time. So you really do need to look deep within the organization to really dismantle old ways of working.
Yeah.
And creating ways for staff to think about new ways of doing things. It helps when you're less reliant on sponsorship.
Yeah.
Because sponsorship creates its own culture, and you kind of have to slowly shift that. It takes time.
Yeah. Yeah. We talked about at the early part of our conversation, change and uncertainty are kind of the standard these days for the charitable sector, not only in Canada, but certainly for the work overseas that you're talking about as well. One or two insights that you might share with another CEO or an emerging leader who might be looking to lead an organization that you've learned over the last 5 years that you think would be helpful for them.
Well, one insight is even if you are embracing of uncertainty, boards like less uncertainty.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
So you really have to walk closely with your board
Mm-hmm.
because they will view risk differently
Sure.
often. So it's really important to communicate well your story and really listen well to how they see the uncertainty. So you got to partner with your board through these uncertain moments because they may read it differently. The role of a board is to manage fiduciary risk. So you got to take care of that. The other insight is hire the best possible people who may be better at things than you are. I'm not the fundraiser. I need a really good person.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you got to get comfortable with people who are exceptionally more talented than you are in other things. And then you got to know how to help them play together, almost like a jazz quartet.
Yeah. Right.
You got to give them space. They got to be able to work with each other. They got to appreciate each other, and then that has to cascade down. But that leadership culture in your core chief group is really, really important.
Yeah.
And if that group can learn well together, you can do some stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. No. Great insights. Thank you. Welcome, Megan Nichols, to the Charity CEO Summit. Really glad to have you here today, and just want to thank you for being with us. And
Thanks, Dave.
would just love to hear a little bit about you and the organization that you're leading at this point, which is Food Banks Mississauga. So why don't you do that, and then we can jump into some other questions.
Sure. So I'm Megan Nichols. I hold the Certified Fundraising Executive designation. I have worked at Food Banks Mississauga for the last 15 years, just over 7 as the CEO. And for 8 years before that, I was the Director of Marketing and Development, leading our marketing and fundraising efforts. Previous to that, I worked in a number of nonprofits. I'm one of those folks that has done their entire career in nonprofit, didn't do one of those kind of pivots, but the bulk of it has been here at the food bank. And so Food Banks Mississauga is the largest food security organization for the city of Mississauga. We're the central hub. We lead a network of over 60 food programs across the city, and we provide food through those programs for over 10 million meals a year. Unfortunately, in the last 5 years, food insecurity has dramatically risen across Canada, and Mississauga saw the fastest growing increase anywhere last year. So before the pandemic, we were 1 in 37 residents using a food bank, and now we're 1 in 13 residents. So as an organization, we have had to grow very rapidly over the last 5 years to try and keep up with the demand in the community.
Yeah, I've seen some of what you've put on LinkedIn, and certainly your own concerns as far as funding models and that type of thing. But before we jump into that, what's it been like to be CEO of that kind of an organization over the last 5 years? I know even when we look more broadly across the country, obviously food banks have been incredibly helpful to many, many people, but I know you have a desire to see it change and be different? Just, yeah, what's it been like to lead?
It has been incredibly difficult.
Hmm.
I live in Mississauga. This is my city. I've lived here for the last 14 years. My parents have lived here for almost 25 years. And it's really tough to see your neighbors struggle more than they were when you started the work. You
Yeah.
know, 15 years ago, fewer of my neighbors were living in poverty than they are now. And no matter how much we give, no matter how much we do in the community and how much advocacy we've done, our governments haven't stepped up in the way we want. We're
Hmm.
relying on charitable donations exclusively to feed people. And so the games that plays with your head when you feel like you know the answers to a
Yeah.
problem, you're continuing to tell the public what it is, and people just won't do it. It's been incredibly difficult. It's
Yeah.
really, really hard.
Yeah. And obviously, the biggest piece of that is financial sustainability. Obviously, food security, you get lots of food donations, I'm sure, too, but you need the money to also uh, not only pay your people, but pay for probably more food than you're actually getting in donations. So let's just talk about the obviously you're stewarding a significant organization, both financially as well as socially for many people in the community there. But I would say we're at a crisis level as far as food banks across the country is concerned. And so, how do you address the issue of sustainability for you as an organization and the movement, really, frankly, across Canada?
Yeah, from a funding perspective, folks often don't know food banks are completely supported by philanthropy. So I have no government funding other than the small amount we get from our regional government. So when it comes to financial stewardship, um, it's a different beast when you don't have a standard set amount that's kind of your year over year funding. And I know that's the case for lots of charities, especially in the international relief and development space, because there's not a lot of government funding for those kind of things. So, from a stewardship perspective, it's been very difficult. I think because I come from a fundraising background, my approach has been to just continue to press in on the fundraising side, and for us to just continue to be in front of people on that out in the community. And I didn't come from finance. And so I used to joke with our former executive director when I led fundraising. I was like, look, I'll raise the money. You need somebody else to add it up.
Right.
Like I'm not like that's not my background at all. And so I've really had to learn what are the basics, what are the key things that I need to keep my eye on from this seat on the bus. And so that's really resulted in me digging in really deep on finance over the last number of years,
Sure.
to make sure I truly understood, from just from an accounting perspective, how we were operating, but also trying to wrap my head around our financial model, like trying to and help the board wrap their head around that, because like if a food bank, for instance, is, we've got a lot of fixed costs between
Hmm.
rent and trucks and people and those kind of things, just trying to help the board understand what levers impact what in our organization, and really wrap my own head around what levers allow us to change what. And it's different for every organization.
Yeah, for sure. What's your advice to other CEOs as they're going through? Maybe they're not working in food banks, but they're working in other challenging areas of the charitable sector. What are the kinds of things that you share with other CEOs as far as supporting them and helping them through these kinds of times that we're facing? Yeah,
We talked a little bit about relationship with the board there when it comes to them
yeah,
understanding finance, but I think additionally is you need to be able to have an authentic conversation with someone at your board. And I think we've really changed our board over the last number of years at Food Banks Mississauga. Current board chair, his question is always, "Is this helpful to you?" He wants to know that the work that the board does is helpful to me in the organization, not additional work to me in the organization. Whew. And so that one alone, saying like, how can we come alongside you, and being able to have those conversations, really makes a huge difference. And so my encouragement to people is to try and be authentic with your board, which, it's not easy, because especially often folks who are leaders in their organization, you're a high performer. You want to do well, you want to succeed and show success. But having your board in step with you and where you're at and what's hard and where you need support is the only way you're going to together move towards a sustainable situation for yourself as a human and the organization. And I'm saying things that I struggle with doing, but I know it's an important thing to do.
Yeah, well, awesome. I'm glad you have that kind of a board chair. That really goes a long way to supporting you, and that's a huge value for sure. When you look at our sector today, and you sort of see down the road 5-10 years, I know that's almost impossible to predict, but you probably have a sense of what it's been like over the last 10 years and where we're possibly going. Another area of sustainability might be mergers and amalgamations, not only from a financial perspective, but certainly from a talent perspective as well. Just curious if you're hearing any talk about that in the market. I know we've seen bigger examples of that with Cancer, and United Way and Habitat have done some of that amalgamation work. Do you see that happening across the food banks world, or do you see that as a useful consideration for the future?
I think there are pros and cons to it, but there
Mhm.
are definitely going to be more. I think mergers is like one extreme end of becoming one organization, but
Yeah,
everything from shared back office functions
yeah,
to shared service delivery models. Things aren't getting cheaper, and donations aren't even rising at the rate of inflation. And
yeah,
so we're going to have to just practically look for ways to be able to do the same with less, or to be able to do more with the same resources. And so, in food bank spaces, there's conversations happening about, how can we amalgamate our fundraising back office, say, like, and, these are all blue sky conversations at that stage to say, but what would it look like instead of having two database teams to have one database team, or, starting to talk about these things to try and bring solutions together. But I think when organizations like, food security organizations in many cases have been operating in their community for almost as long as I've been alive. And so they have a history, they
yeah.
have a legacy. And so
Mhm,
for organizations with deep community roots,
mhm.
that's the con for me, is how do we not lose those deep community, volunteer, historical roots, while accessing those economies of scale for organizations.
Yeah,
But it all has to be in service of better serving clients.
yeah,
We can't allow mergers and amalgamations to be kind of the tail wagging the dog from the donor desire and
yeah,
allow it to have any negative impact on the people we serve. They can't afford any more negative impact.
yeah. Well, Megan, thank you so much for this today. We really appreciate it. Thank you for the work that you're doing in Mississauga, and what many of your peers are doing across the country for food banks. We support you in the sense that it's hard work, and it's not getting any easier, obviously, by the sounds of it. But we certainly appreciate all that you're contributing back to the community, and we really trust that not only donors can reconsider what their investment might be, but certainly other supports, whether it be government or corporate or whatever those means may be. Thank you for your
Absolutely.
continued pursuit of that as CEO, and in a time when it's not easy to lead, and yet you're in that leadership space, and so we're grateful for all that you're doing. So thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
Well, hi everyone. We're just going to do a bit of a brief intermission here. I just wanted to let you know, obviously these videos were shortened for the purpose of today's gathering. They will be released in a longer version on our podcast in due course over the next few weeks probably. So just wanted to let you know that there will be longer versions available online sometime soon. So just want to thank our first set of speakers, obviously STACEY and Fred and Megan, all coming from very different organizations, and yet leading and providing the insights that we're getting today. So we're grateful for them and really appreciate it. Our next group, again, a unique group of CEOs, Kimberly Hansen of Health Partners, which is now a partnership of 20 organizations. I think they've just added 3 more recently. But health organizations, all organizations that you would know of, but all working together. And so excited to hear from Kim and some of her insights. Heather James, CEO at Christie Gardens, is going to be talking about a partnership that she had she continues to have with the University of Toronto and Christie Gardens, which is a retirement elder care organization here in Toronto. And then Dave Proughton, he had a very meaningful succession process when he left as CEO of JDRF, the Junior Diabetes Research Foundation, which has now been renamed to another name that I can't remember off the hand. But anyways, Dave will be sharing with us some of that. And then another Dave Kay, will be sharing some thoughts around mission-driven thinking. So those are the next ones that are coming up. We do have, I believe, 4 or 5 of our CEO guests that are going to be available in a separate Zoom room so that you can join us there if you have time. Certainly an opportunity to hear them more directly, and at the same time share with others who might be on the call with us today. So that'll be a separate link on Zoom. But Jim, are we ready to jump into the next set of videos?
We are.
Okay, well, let's go for it then. That'd be great.
Kim, we just really appreciate you being part of the summit and have a few questions for you today. But just before we jump into that, wanted to get a sense of you. You've had a very diverse career, and now you've been in healthcare a couple of times and PR and export. So just love to get a 30,000-foot view on your career and then Health Partners, where you're currently at.
Sure. Yeah, I spent the first half of my career in financial services,
Mm-hmm.
doing a lot of different kind of corporate functions. I love to dabble in different things and keep learning, and so I had the great privilege to work through enterprise risk management and human resources and business development and re-engineering and those kinds of things while at a large crown corporation, and then had my mid-career crisis, if you will, and decided that I wanted to spend the latter part of my career doing work that really has a lot of meaning to me.
Mm-hmm.
I was privileged at that time to join Diabetes Canada, a health charity that means a lot to me because I live with diabetes myself, and
Mm-hmm.
and that really gave me the bug for the not-for-profit space, and led after some time to me becoming the CEO of Health Partners,
Mm-hmm.
which is a collaborative of 20 national health charities who in turn support Canadians with hundreds of serious health conditions, from cancer to heart disease to rare disease to mental illness and everything in between.
Wow, that's a lot of work, and a number of partners to manage, I'm sure, or at least develop relationships with. As we jump into this, just from the perspective of partnerships and from the whole collaborative nature of what you do, charities often rely on partnerships for growth and impact. And just curious, how does Health Partners work? How does it share directly with these other members, and how do you amplify the mission when you've got 20 different organizations that you're working with?
It's an excellent question. Health Partners was created because of a belief in partnership. And to kind of give context for that, I'd like to start with kind of a mindset that I hold quite tightly and that I think frames this. I recently saw a presentation by David Coletto of Abacus Data, and
Okay.
he was talking about, we're living in challenging times where it can often feel like there isn't enough to go around, enough, resources of all kinds. And he referred to this as being a scarcity mindset that people
Hmm.
are experiencing, have been for the last number of months. And he
Sure.
notes that that has led to zero-sum thinking
Hmm.
in the part of many people, where basically we believe on some level that in order for us to win, somebody else must lose. I fundamentally have never believed that.
Hmm.
I believe in a positive sum game where the total gains and losses are greater than zero, which allows for win-win scenarios. And I think that when we as charity leaders hold to a belief in a positive sum game and collaborate to win that game, we all achieve far more than we could have achieved as individuals going it alone. And Health Partners was created 37 years ago in belief of that we could fundraise as a collective in
Hmm.
ways that we can't as 20 individual charities, going into workplaces to invite employees to make donations via payroll deduction to one or more of our member charities. And what we find, Dave, just quickly as sort of proof in the pudding, is that about 35% of the donations that folks make to or through health partners where we work, about 35% of those donations are made to the collective. And I think that that's people showing that they also believe that whole being greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's a great percentage of people. So the other 65% are giving directly, well, not directly, but through health partners. Those funds end up directly with the other members.
That's
Or-
exactly right.
Yeah, yeah.
Even the funds that get directed to health partners as a collective get distributed to our members.
Right. Okay.
We've been able to raise more than $230 million for our member charities in the last 30 plus years, which we're really proud of, and
Yeah.
we're just getting started.
Yeah, that's awesome. Okay. So continuing on that same theme, Kim, just when you look at maintaining health partners' mission, obviously it has its mission and focus, and yet you've got members who during the day, the other times that they're focusing on themselves, advocating for their specific organizations, and yet they're part of this collective. So how do you ensure that health partners, their core mission remains a guiding principle in the decisions you're making as a CEO, and especially when we're talking about member funding and those kinds of considerations and collaborations?
We are a member organization first and foremost, and
Yeah.
I could put you to sleep with our governance and how we stay connected to our members. I won't. But one of the things that we, and I think our members believe, is that we are not competing with one another. We are
Okay.
supporting one another in achieving our mutual goals, which
Mm,
is ensuring a healthier Canada.
right.
And what I see is that not only do our members sort of live that value by continuing to be members of health partners, by collaborating with us in our fundraising campaigns, but they take it a step further. They actually more and more are collaborating with one another. So, for example,
Okay.
our members, the Canadian Cancer Society, Heart and Stroke Foundation, and Diabetes Canada join together to advocate on policy on a range of measures related to the prevention of the development of disease.
Hmm.
Our other members, the Mental Health Commission of Canada and the Hemophilia Society, just recently held a really great webinar talking about the mental health impact of living with a chronic condition. And
Right.
so I think they're seeing that we can achieve more when we do it in partnership and collaboration with one another.
When you consider leadership today, it's no easy. It's not getting any easier, right? Obviously, you've led now for a number of years in different organizations. And looking ahead, what do you see as significant opportunities, but also challenges that you will face as a leader, and maybe not even just about your organization, just yourself as a CEO today? What are the opportunities and challenges?
I think that we're living in times where the competition for share of mind, the competition for our attention has never been more fierce. We all are experiencing so many messages coming at us. We're consuming all news and information in teeny tiny bits. And so we we have to understand that the communications landscape has changed, the engagement landscape has changed, and I think that that has many, many implications. When I think about what does that mean for us in terms of partnership and collaboration,
Yeah.
my experience has been that the imperative for us to be partnering and collaborating deliberately, strategically, kind of going out of our way
Yeah.
to work in partnership with others, that imperative has never been higher than it is now.
Hmm.
Partly because none of us in the charity space has enough resources.
Right. Yeah.
And so we have to be stretching the resources that we have by collaborating with others to broaden the impact without it costing one organization more. I also think our donors and, policymakers are expecting us to be collaborating and partnering together. More and more people want to see that various charities that serve a similar demographic are joining together to tackle big, complicated issues. When I was at Diabetes Canada, I worked in advocacy for people with diabetes, and our community was faced with a problem that we could have tried to address alone, but instead I reached out to a sister charity that served the same community. We formed a partnership to tackle the issue, and it worked, I think, because we did it together. And when we join together and collaborate, it becomes a little easier to kind of cut through the noise and have your message land with your intended audience. And so I think that even though it might sometimes feel harder to work in collaboration with others, we often refer in health partners to that African proverb, alone we go fast, together we go far.
Just one final question, Kim, just with regard to health partners, is one of your strategies to grow the partnership or the memberships?
I'm really proud to say that we have just added 3 new members to our organization. And that's an exciting moment for us because we went through the first almost 35 years of our existence with the same 16 members. We added the Mental Health Commission a few years ago, which was wonderful. And now we are just about to announce the addition of CNIB,
Oh,
Osteoporosis Canada, and Canadian Blood Services, who
oh.
we're just thrilled to be partnering with. We're going to take a minute to make sure that we welcome those members to our collective and onboard them fully. So we won't be adding formal members anytime very soon. However, we are also forming partnerships with other charitable organizations who want to perhaps tap into workplace giving as an additional revenue stream. And we can do that in partnership with them so they can reach out to me with any questions.
Thank you for your time today with us. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure that those that are watching will appreciate your experience and the expertise and all that you've brought to the charitable sector. So we really appreciate having you today. Thanks, Kim.
It's always a pleasure to talk to you, Dave. Thank you.
Good. Well, hi, Heather. Thank you so much for being with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, Heather Janes is a longtime colleague of mine and friend, and really just grateful to have her at the summit today. So, Heather, give us a little sense of who you are and what you do, and the organization that you lead.
Well, I'm the CEO of Christie Gardens, which is a Toronto-based retirement home that has been in operation for 40 years. I grew up in elder care and around elder care. My mother was very involved in elder care in this province, so it's kind of in my blood.
Yeah, and Christy continues to make an impact in the elder care market for sure. So, thank you for being here. We're going to talk about partnership and influence a little bit, but before we do that, I mean, you've expanded in different ways some of the work of Christie Gardens outside of the core business of of where it's located, and maintaining mission focus as well is always part of what does an expansion look like. Just wondered if you could address that for us first, and then we'll drop into some of the partnership elements as well.
Yeah, around 7 or 8 years ago when we were working on our strategic plan and honing and reevaluating our mission and our vision, one of the things we were pretty serious about was that our mission is to empower elders to live well.
Uh-huh.
And we recognized at that time that that wasn't just the elders that choose to make Christie Gardens their home, that was the broader elders, whether that be Ontario or Canada or wherever our influence could land. And that has really allowed us to broaden our scope. We're always very committed to, of course, making sure that the elders that choose Christie Gardens as their home is our primary focus. That is, we've got to be responsible there from every level. But having done this work for 40 years, we know that there's a lot that can be done to improve elder care in our city, in our province, country. And so when we say empower elders to live well, we mean that in a broader sense.
Well, let's just jump into the partnership equation then. Partnerships are often about either growth or impact, and you've been able to establish a really strong partnership with U of T and Christie. So I'm just curious, can you give us the high level view of what that looks like, and what have been the impacts of that?
One of our strategic pillars was influence. And one of the ways that we want to influence the sector is to influence young people to choose a career in gerontology. And we know from experience that if we hire a receptionist who's training in another field, sometimes they fall in love with our field. That's what I did. I didn't train to be a part of elder care.
Right.
But you fall in love with it and you realize what wonderful work it is and how impactful it can be to yourself to work with elders and make that difference. So we have always looked for ways to engage students and young people and draw them into our field. And I met a professor from U of T who was just speaking my language on that. It was like he was saying words I'd said so many times. He teaches an undergrad course at U of T in gerontology, and he was looking for ways to draw students in from other programs and snatch them in for our industry and for our work. And he's done a great job of that. So we partnered with U of T to create a classroom embedded inside Christie Gardens, where students from the University of Toronto come and they study in our space in this course. And we partner them with an adult learner. So we have 25 students from U of T and 25 residents of Christie Gardens who co-learn. And they do the projects together. And at the beginning of the class, it's so interesting to watch how it's a little socially awkward at the beginning. I mean, some of these kids haven't engaged with elderly people. And quite frankly, there's ageism on the other side too. Some of the elderly folks haven't necessarily engaged with 20-somethings in a while. But by the end of the class, true, long-lasting friendships have been formed. And months later, we have these young people coming and taking folks out for lunch and hanging out. And so there was learning on both sides and really great discussions around elder care and ageism and how we approach healthy aging in society.
Yeah. So it sounds like you would entertain other partnerships.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Do you have a sense of what kinds of partnerships would be really meaningful to Christie, obviously as an organization, but perhaps to even other players in the marketplace?
We are looking to partner with a company called Greenhouse Projects, which is something coming out of the States. It's a model of care that specifically benefits those living with dementia. And you sometimes think, well, this is an American model, and how's that really going to work, especially right now? I mean, there's a lot of sensitivities around it.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, there's good people doing things and they've maybe dived into an area that you haven't as deeply. They've really done a deep dive. And I love the humility and the co-benefit that happens when you open yourself up to partnering with people that just might know something you don't.
Yeah.
And I think for a while we've known these folks from the States who do the Eden Alternative and this new greenhouse project. I think we've known for a while, just open your ears and hearts to what they have to say. And it's reciprocal because they're learning from us. We do things a little different in Canada too. We do some things we do better. And so they'll be visiting not too long from now to hold a conference in our home. And it's when you allow people in and when you go visit them, there's so much openness and learning that can happen. It's really beautiful. And we've seen that many times over the years. So that's the one we're excited about coming up.
Oh, that's great. Awesome. Being a CEO today, being a CEO in elder care and in coming through the pandemic, all of that, and was not an easy time. Can you give us just a sense of what it's like to lead in elder care today in Canada and to be the influence and the partner and the advocate that you want to be?
COVID was a very difficult time for those working in healthcare.
Yeah.
And yet it, in a way, was a beautiful time. You know, with the highways were empty, we were still going to work. You had to. It was 24-hour care, right? So there's many beautiful stories that have come out of it. Sad, but beautiful stories that came out of it. It was very bonding for our team. Leading now, it is very difficult to recruit people. A lot of people left healthcare. So we've got to be innovative, right? If there's one thing we know about COVID, it caused us to move quick and be innovative.
Yeah, for sure.
And also have a measured but an approach to risk, which allowed you to take that next step wisely, even with risk all around. So I'm excited to be a post-COVID leader in healthcare because I think that we have more awareness than we've ever had before, which allows me to be pretty bold when I speak to people about the changes that are needed in elder care.
Oh, that's great. Awesome. Well, Heather, thank you for your time today. We really appreciate it, and just your insights as a leader and the things that you've been able to do with Christy and other partnerships. Just appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, great. Well, welcome to the CEO Summit. We're glad to have you as a guest today and just appreciate your time with us. Dave Proudden has been the CEO of JDRF, the Junior Diabetes Research Foundation. And Dave, maybe give us just a quick overview of yourself and the organization.
Sure. First of all, thank you for the invite to be here. And I retired about 14 months ago from JDRF, so it was a wonderful journey. I was there for 10 years as the CEO, and it's a really interesting organization because it focuses solely on type 1 diabetes, but it's a global organization. So we work we were the Canadian affiliate within a global organization. So what was one of the neat things about it is, we were sort of charged with operating within Canada.
Yeah.
But we really benefited from being global and having one global research strategy and having a bunch of peers around the world that you could lean on for advice. And so in some ways it was a great model to be working in, and I feel very fortunate to have had the opportunity to sort of work within that for 10 years and to hopefully made a little bit of difference and left it in good shape when I left, which I feel really confident in because I know we're talking about succession planning, and
Exactly.
a great leader followed me.
Yeah, and so that's what I wanted to talk about today. But before we get to succession, you obviously had to have built some leadership into the organization before you could do a succession plan. So maybe could we step back, whatever that time frame might be, and just talk about how did you develop the organization from an emerging leader's perspective, and then we'll talk about succession.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point that you make, because when you think about what you're charged with as a CEO is really developing a team. That's one of the most important things. I think we can often obviously work on mission and fundraising and advocacy, whatever the core deliverables are of the organization, but having a strong team is critical to the success today and tomorrow.
Right.
I was really blessed to have a strong head of HR at JDRF, and I was there 10 years, but I'd say, after several years, we started to work on succession planning, but not just say for the CEO, but for multiple levels in the organization. And so, when I would talk to my direct reports about what their future career aspirations were, obviously we had an annual performance review process, but part of really understanding what their aspirations were 1, 3, 5 years out. And then we did that every year, and we started to track, where do they want to go? Were there cross-training opportunities? And that really helped us have a good understanding of their future goals and objectives. It also allowed us, when it came time to talk about succession planning, to have a really good handle on, were there any internal candidates, one or more, right? Because I think that's really important to understand.
Yeah.
And then that leads to a whole process. But having that work done in advance, and so me having a visibility on it, but also our board chair and some of the board having that, was very helpful just to really understand the lay of the land, but also making sure, were we actually developing people, right?
Yeah.
I think that's just critical, because at the end of the day, you do want to have some bench strength, and I think that's really, really important for an organization.
So were there a couple of practical things that you did in developing the team along those lines?
Just having an ongoing performance management system is really important, because I think, people deserve to know if they're doing a great job and if there's areas to work on. And I think as a leader, right, you are always trying to find that balance between giving positive feedback and giving constructive feedback so that they can continue to develop. So I think those two are really critical. I don't think it's just an annual thing, though. You have to do this on a regular basis, right? You have to talk to people and just sort of make sure that they're getting feedback regularly. The old no surprises is a really good thing to credo to live by, I think.
Yeah. So beyond the practical, Dave, I mean, you've obviously walked through a significant succession planning process with your board and evidently with the team as well. Just talk to us a little bit about how did that, what was that transition like, and how did those discussions start with the board, first of all?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting for me to reflect on, because I'd been there about 8 years, and in many ways, we'd never really had a succession planning discussion. In some ways, the first time it happened, it was almost a bit uncomfortable because it was almost, you wonder, geez, are they trying to send me a signal? It's time to go.
Right. Yeah.
But really, you know, when I reflected back, it was sort of framed as, David, if you want to stay until you're 65, that's great. But if you aren't going to do that, the board would just love some visibility on what your plans are. And frankly, I'd given it a little bit of thought, but not a ton of thought. So I give our board chair a lot of credit because, you know, he kickstarted the discussions, and it took, you know, I would say several months to sort of have the discussions and really talk about what my plans were, and the potential timing, and then, you know, they were that would then lead to our board chair sharing that with the board in confidence, right, in the in-camera
Sure.
sessions and et cetera. But, you know, I think it was all done in a way that was very respectful of where I was wanting to go. I would say, though, if it happened in, say, year 1 or 2, I might have felt a little differently. But once again, in retrospect, right, um, you should have a succession plan in place, because what if something happens, right? Like, you can't
Absolutely.
control everything. And so I think it's a kind of incumbent on the board to kick that off.
So you ultimately did choose somebody from internal, in your, well, you didn't, the board did, but in the last transition of that, what did that feel like when you handed it off to your, I think it was your VP of philanthropy, if I'm not mistaken?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I think once again, the board ran a process, right? And they had to determine, you know, the variables. Are they going to do an internal search first? Are they going to do an internal and external search, right? It leads to a whole bunch of process discussions for them.
Yeah.
And, but, you know, so the board did their thing, right? And they made a great decision because, you know, Jessica's is a great leader for the organization. And
Sure.
we then developed a really robust transition plan. And one of the things that, you know, we had a lot of time to actually work on it, but then also a significant amount of time to implement it. And I would say, you know, it led to, you know, communications with our donors, with our team. You know, we were very, very thoughtful about how we rolled it out.
Mm-hmm.
And in many ways, then we also did a bit of a tour together to introduce Jessica to anybody that she hadn't met, or some of the advocacy discussions, you know, so some of the areas that were sort of outside of her traditional responsibilities, how do we actually, you know, make sure that she's got more exposure to the people, but also to, you know, what we're working on strategically. So,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it really, it was very intentional
Mm-hmm.
and thought out. And I think just we tried to communicate it as clearly as possible, internally and externally. So it just didn't become a real, hopefully an unsettling point for the organization
Yeah.
and the donors and supporters.
Just a final thought before we close here. I mean, you were there for 10 years. You helped build that team up. You and the board and Jessica moved through a transition process. Good communication, good planning, all of those things. Your advice to somebody who might be in your position now, or in the position you were in now, and wondering how to bring this up either with their board or with any internal staff. Any advice? Just some highlights or insights that you might have.
I think that's a really, really great question, because I think it all starts with trust, right?
Hmm.
It's sometimes an overused word, but when you think about having that discussion, for example, with your board chair,
Yeah.
right, it could feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So you have to have that trusted relationship and it goes both ways. The board chair has to have the trust of the head of the organization to sit down and say, hey, this is really a risk management, you know, responsibility of the board. We just want to ensure that, you know, on a regular basis, we're checking in, seeing how you're feeling. You know, do you have any future plans? And I think that also then, you know, trust is really important with your senior leadership team as the head of the organization, right? So I just think the way to have those organizations is to build that trust. It doesn't happen overnight, but I do think if you're not in a situation where you've got trust, that frankly, that would make it that much more difficult, I think, too.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's good. Well, Dave, thank you so much for your insights today. Appreciate you sharing that with us and your journey. Just grateful for your time. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Well, good afternoon, Dave. It's great to be with you today. Thank you. And for everyone watching, this is Dave Kay. He's the Managing Director of Pro Venture Advisors and also an aligned partner with us at Cause Leadership. So we're glad to have him as part of our conversation. for the Charities CEO Summit. So Dave, welcome. Great to have you.
It's really great to be here, Dave. Thanks.
Do you want us to give us just a 30,000-foot view on what you do and ProVenture does?
Okay. ProVenture is a firm that comes beside largely not-for-profits, and we act as advisors around risk and around strategy. We mentor some CEOs. We deal with special situations, times when charities are in a place where they feel like they've never been before. My partner and I, Cheryl, have lots of history, so we can often, go back on some history and help them along in something that feels like kind of new space for them.
Awesome. Thank you. So today, Dave, we're going to talk about, some mission-driven thinking, and we've got some questions on that, as well as kind of managing crisis and public perception. I think I'm sure you've done some of that as well in your work. But why don't we just jump in with when you think about impact in charities, what are you thinking about?
Well, when I think about impact, it actually takes me back to probably half my career, which was in sort of for-profit and leadership in banks and other delivery services. And in that space, it was all about product delivery and finding a way to make that product in an excellent way and then deliver it in a unique way.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I think about impact in the charity space, I think that's what charities deliver. They deliver impact. So essentially, that's what they're there for. But it's not so easy because they have to deliver not only for the social needs of those they serve, but they also have to deliver for those who fund them.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's almost like a two-sided market. So when you're just selling some shoes or a man's suit or whatever else, it's relatively easy. You do it, you deliver it, you get your money, and you make some profit. In charity, you've got two things going on at the same time. So really, even though you're delivering impact, it's very complicated because it's across two different types of markets.
Yeah, for sure. So where do you see impact when you're thinking about strategy and direction setting for a charity?
Yeah, actually, I find that for strategy, impact is the very heart of it all. And so when somebody is trying to deliver a strategic approach for the organization, a strategic direction, it should be all centered on this impact on both sides of the market I was mentioning. Often what you see in strategy, though, is kind of almost like a planning procedure that you would see out of Business 101 at university. Yeah. And it's sort of this idea that we come up with a bunch of initiatives. Often those initiatives are being directed by a certain part of the charity, and maybe the impact of what they're actually trying to get done, either for the donor funder group or for the people that they're serving, gets a little bit lost. So strategy should be all about finding a way to deliver that impact as uniquely and as differentiated as possible. We have 86,000 charities in the country, so being totally different can sometimes in itself be a challenge. But that strategy ought to be about finding that differentiation. Not only that differentiation, but the specific capabilities that you deliver within the organization in order for that impact, that intended impact, to happen. And where it gets actually even more complicated is trying to align those two things. So we've got impact for the people we're serving, and then finding funders who can relate to that impact, who want to fund that impact. And that alignment part is also part of this, difficult to do strategy in the space.
One of the things about the charitable sector right at the moment, and maybe that's just systemic, is that, there's change and uncertainty throughout. And, we've been through the pandemic that brought change and uncertainty. We're facing some cross-border issues that might complicate people's ability to either donate or organizations' ability to be sustainable. Part of what it is to run a charity these days is managing crisis and public perception. What what have you seen as far as some organizations that are maybe in that situation where they're having to manage a crisis or deal with the public's perception of what's going on?
So crisis, I mean, I've run into it in my time, and I see it. I think there's some really good principles to hang on to when this happens.
Yeah.
Number one, it's great to have a crisis leader.
Right.
You say, okay, this person is the leader of this. It doesn't have to be the CEO, but it has to be somebody who can really relate to whatever that crisis is. And then that person is given full authority to get as much confirmable information as possible. So there's this very open hands to say, if this person wants to know something, please tell them. So there's this idea of just getting to the bottom of the barrel, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, sure.
And then just being truthful about that. The bank I used to work for, one of our cultural statements was never round up. And so I think that's really important in crisis, because as soon as you start rounding up, you get stalking eyebrows coming right back at you. That can't be true. And we see it in the world today, even with geopolitics. And don't avoid, if there's questions coming your way from the press or from regulators or whoever else, don't avoid those things. Always answer those questions and use that truth that you've got.
Yeah.
Then take all the necessary things to repair it. Like we all know just from our own experience individually and when we run organizations that things happen. So that this in a way should feel like, okay, it happened, but let's just deal with this and make it better.
Yeah.
And part of those actions should probably be really focused on repairing reputation. So, if you do this and you do it well and you tell the truth and you talk about what you're doing to repair it, it's amazing. People can be forgiving. And, and so I think that's a fairly good route.
When it comes to impact, why should organizations have a relentless focus on it?
Well, if it's the most important thing you're doing, like be relentless, like,
right.
So like, that's almost obvious. A more subtle thing is like you were mentioning how the world's getting complicated and changing.
Yeah.
So the impact that we have today might not be the impact we need tomorrow.
Yeah.
So there's this whole idea of things changing. My wife is one of the leaders of campaigns for the largest Canadian cancer charity, and they deal with like a disease that's awful, and it keeps on changing, and the research that has to go against it is entirely different than what it was yesterday.
Sure. So
relentless way to get towards the thing that's most important just should define what a charity really is.
Yeah. Just maybe as a final comment, Dave, I mean, you deal with charity CEOs and the issues that they're facing. What are one or two insights that you might have for CEOs today, or even the emerging leadership that's moving towards CEO roles, just based on your own experience and what you've seen in the sector?
One would be to deal with reality. If it's complicated, identify those complications.
Yeah.
And accept them and sort of say, we're going to tackle these things, even if they're gnarly. We spend time to say, what are the things that are getting in the way of you getting to that strategy, that intent that you want? And people being very real about that is like a fantastic way to accelerate your impact. So that'd be one thing. The other one, I guess, relates to what that CEO told me as well. Just talk to funders about what's really happening in your shop, and let them know that this is difficult. This is something that we're working on. Here's what we're doing. But have you seen anything else that maybe would work for you? Because some of those people, if they're invested in your place, they're the ones who can maybe be that objective ear, that objective eye to sort of say, here's something you can do. So about this sort of radical transparency, kind of just being real about where we're at. And as we've said, it's really complicated to do. So the more we can get real, the more sense that we can really, the things that we really want to achieve.
Awesome. Well, Dave, thanks so much for your time today and for your insights. We appreciate it, and look forward to sharing this with our summit attendees.
Thank you. Thank you. It's an honor that you asked. Appreciate it. Take care.
Well, hey, friends, thank you again for joining us today at the Charity CEO Summit. Just want to thank Kimberly Hansen, and Heather Janes, Dave Prouton, and Dave Kay for their the videos that we just saw. Appreciate all of their insights and their contribution today. I'm going to pass this over to Jim, but as I mentioned earlier, we are going to jump over to a Zoom room, and the link is in the chat at the moment. You can see it there. We're happy to do that as well. So, Jim, let me pass it over to you. You've got some sort of final thoughts, I'm sure, and I'll head over to the Zoom room.
Yeah, thanks very much, everybody, and thanks to the leaders. So great to get those insights on the mindsets and the decision-making abilities of these leaders right in the saddle and giving advice. It's been very helpful. We look forward to seeing you in the Zoom room. We invite you to think of some other questions you want to ask directly to the leaders who join us, some of the interviewees, and so think through that. We're also going to also introduce the Charity CEO Forum to you, a peer advisory membership group that's launching in late April here, looking to gather charity CEOs, EDs, presidents around to meet on a monthly basis to discuss some of these mindsets, to help grow and strengthen our teams, and to work with our executive peers in some of the support that we need. So, but if you're unable to join us over on the VIP call, we would really encourage you to have a look at the Charity CEO Forum if you're interested in it. The website that just explains that. You can download the program guide there, and there's some of the details that you would need for that if you're not able to join the VIP room here today. The full-length copy of each of these interviews that Dave had with the leaders will actually come out soon. In the next coming months, we will be posting those as our podcasts, so you can see the full-length interviews in the coming weeks. But thanks so much for joining the Charity Leader Summit today. It's been so exciting to be able to gather together, do this online. And we look forward to seeing you, those of you who can join, to meet the speakers personally and live over at on the VIP link, VIP Zoom room link. All the best.
Thanks, everyone.